My name is Miles Harlan. I'm 27, and I live in a cramped apartment in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. Rent eats up half my paycheck, but the view of the Charles River almost makes it bearable. I work as a financial analyst at an investment firm downtown. I spend my days poring over numbers, building dashboards, and fighting off sleep during endless meetings about market trends. It's not a bad gig. It pays well. It keeps my mind busy. But it's not what I dreamed of as a kid. Back then, I wanted to write novels to craft stories that would touch people's souls. Instead, here I am, staring at stock charts, living a steady life that's safe but lacks any real spark. I don't let anyone get too close. Ever. My company loves those team-building gimmicks. They dragged us to a 3-day seminar at a lakeside resort near Concord, Massachusetts. Picture cedar cabins, crackling campfires, and overeager HR folks pushing trust falls and icebreakers. I wasn't thrilled. I'd rather spend a weekend with a book or a run along the river than fake excitement for corporate rituals. But skipping wasn't an option. My boss made that clear. So I packed a duffel with a few paperbacks and headed to the lake, determined to hang back as much as I could. The place was stunning, that perfectly curated postcard kind of beauty. Golden leaves drifting to the shore, the lake smooth as glass under a slate-gray autumn sky, cabins glowing in warm light. My coworkers were already buzzing when I arrived, laughing too loud, clinking beers, signing up for kayaking or whatever else was on the agenda. I nodded at a few familiar faces and kept moving. The one person I had to watch was Derek Hayes, our vice president. At 47, he was all charisma and iron control. Impeccable suits, a tongue sharper than a blade. The kind of guy who could charm a client with a grin or cut you down with a glance. He wasn't cruel, just untouchable, like he'd already won at life, and knew it. I respected him, mostly because I had no choice. Derek's wife, Nora, was there too. I'd seen her a handful of times at company events, holiday parties, charity galas. She was 45, always elegant but understated, the type who faded into the spotlight cast on her husband. Blonde hair cut just above her shoulders, soft brown eyes, a polite smile that never quite reached her face. She stood by his side, nodding as he talked, her presence like a footnote to his story. I'd never given her a second thought beyond that. She was just his wife, a background figure in my world. The first day was a blur of small talk and forced smiles. I dodged the group dinner, claiming a headache, and settled on my cabin's deck with a book and old Steinbeck I'd read a dozen times. The night air was crisp, sharp with pine and lake water. Other cabins twinkled across the lawn, laughter spilling out. But I was content alone, silence wrapping around me like a blanket. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I thought I'd imagined it at first. A muffled sob, drifting from the lake's direction. I lowered my book, listening. It came again thin and raw, like a cry held back to stay hidden. My first instinct was to ignore it. It wasn't my business. People cry, people fight, people have their own messes. But that noise pulled at me, tugging a string I couldn't leave alone. I set the book down, shrugged on my jacket, and stepped off the deck. My boots crunched on the gravel path toward the water. The lake lay dark, mirroring the resort's faint lights. And at the end of a wooden dock, there she was, Nora, sitting alone. Knees drawn up, face buried in her hands. I froze, breath catching. I had no idea what I was walking into, but it was too late to turn back. Her sobs had quieted, but they lingered, slicing the night. I took a step forward, voice low to avoid startling her. Nora. She stiffened, head snapping up, eyes wide and wet in the moonlight. For a beat, she stared like a deer caught in headlights, then wiped her face with her sleeve. "Miles," she said, voice shaky but trying for steady. I didn't think anyone was out here. I stood there, hands in my pockets, unsure. "You okay?" I asked, gentle, like to a friend. She shook her head, a tiny, broken motion. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "Not at all." The night air bit sharp, heavy with the lake's chill and a faint pine scent. Nora sat on the dock, knees tucked close, her blonde hair tumbling messily over the collar of her oversized sweater. Moonlight caught the tear tracks on her cheeks, making them glisten before she brushed them away again. Her movements were quick, almost embarrassed. I stayed a few feet back, hands still pocketed, not crowding her. The sobs had stopped, but her breathing hitched, like she was holding on by a thread. I didn't know what to say. Hell, I barely knew her. But walking away felt wrong, like leaving a wound exposed. "Nora?" I said again, softer, crouching to her level without closing in. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. I heard, and I couldn't keep reading like nothing was happening. She looked at me, brown eyes wide and searching, like she was testing if I meant it or was just being polite. Then she let out a small, trembling laugh, more breath than joy. "You're probably the only one here who'd rather read than party," she said, voice rough from tears. I shrugged, half smiling. Guilty. "Books don't make me do trust falls." She smiled at that, a quick flash that softened her features, making her look less like Derek's wife and more like herself. I sat on the dock, an arm's length away, boots dangling over the water. Below, the lake reflected the distant cabin glows. "You don't have to tell me anything," I said, eyes on the horizon. "But I'm here if you want." I didn't look at her, not to pressure, but I felt her gaze weighing whether to open up. For a long stretch, only the soft lap of water against wood broke the quiet. Then she spoke, voice low, almost to herself. "I used to be someone, Miles. Really someone. I was an architect. I designed buildings, won awards, saw my name in magazines. Then I met Derek. And I don't know. I thought we were building something bigger than my career. So I stepped back, quit my job, followed him, became the wife who shows up at galas and smiles." She paused, fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. "This morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. I'm 45, and I've spent years being invisible." Her words hit hard, not just the pain in them, but because I knew that feeling, that slow erosion of who you thought you were. I'd felt it too, burying my writing dreams under spreadsheets and deadlines. I turned to her, keeping my voice steady. "You're not invisible," I said. "Not here, not now." She met my eyes, narrowing them slightly, like probing my intent, checking if I was flattering her. "You don't have to be nice," she shot back, sharper but without bite. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm saying what I see." She didn't respond right away, staring at the lake, hands clenched on her knees. Then, slowly, she kept going. She told me about Derek's late nights at the office, how he'd stopped asking about her day, how she'd stopped hoping he would. "He's not a bad man," she said, like convincing herself. "He's just consumed. And I've let myself get consumed too, in my own way." I listened without interrupting, letting her words fill the space between us. She talked about the buildings she'd designed once. Clean lines, open spaces, places where you could breathe. "I miss it," she admitted, voice cracking. "I miss myself. I didn't try to fix it, no advice, no pat phrases. I just sat there, letting her words settle, feeling their weight." "I get it," I said finally, low. "I wanted to be a writer once. Not emails or reports, real stories. Now I tally other people's money, wondering if I blew my shot." She turned to me, eyes softer, curious. "Why'd you stop?" she asked. I shrugged, gaze dropping to the water. "Safe choices, I guess. Easier to pay rent than chase a dream." She nodded, like she heard more than my words. And for a moment, we were just two lost souls on a path. We stayed longer than I expected, cold seeping into my jacket, the lake stretching dark and endless. She didn't cry anymore, but her silence shifted less heavy, like she'd released something. "I should head back," she said at last, standing and brushing off her sweater. "Derek might notice I'm gone." Her tone was dry, almost wry, no bitterness. I stood too, legs numb from the chill. "You sure you're okay?" I asked. She looked at me, face softening, moonlight tracing her smile's edges. "Not yet," she said. "But thanks for staying, for not walking away." I nodded, chest tight with something nameless. "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. She walked toward the cabins, her figure melting into shadows, and I lingered on the dock a bit longer, her voice echoing in my head. I didn't know what I'd stepped into, but it wasn't nothing. The lake lay still, a black mirror catching the cabin's faint glows far off. The cold had dug deeper, piercing my jacket, but I barely noticed. Nora's words hung in the air heavy, alive like they'd carved a space between us that hadn't existed an hour before. She sat beside me on the dock, knees still up, hands no longer clenched on her sweater but loose on her thighs. Tears had dried. Her breathing evened out, but her brown eyes held a quiet intensity, like rediscovering the world after years away. I didn't push her to keep talking. I stayed put, boots over the water, letting silence do its work. After a long pause, she spoke again, voice gentler, testing the words. "You know, I used to sketch every day," she said, eyes on the lake. Blueprints, plans, doodles on napkins. I'd picture a building in my head, a glass-walled library, a house blending into the earth, and I had to get it on paper, like it burned inside me. Now, I can't even remember the last time I picked up a pencil. She laughed a small, bitter sound. Derek called it my cute little hobby. I guess I started believing him. My heart twisted. I knew that ache, letting someone else's voice drown your own until you doubt your fire. "It wasn't a hobby," I said slowly, firm. "You built real things. That doesn't fade." She looked at me, eyes narrowing, gauging if I was kind or real. "You don't know," she said. No edge, just quiet challenge. "Yeah, I do," I pressed, holding her gaze. "Because you're telling me now, and I see it on your face. It's still there, Nora. You're still there." Her breath caught. For a second, I thought she'd cry again, but she smiled, a real one, small but unguarded, like light cracking through a wall. "You're not like the others at the firm," she said, tilting her head. "They're all loud, always performing. You? You're quiet. You watch." I shrugged, a touch embarrassed, but her words landed deep. "I just pay attention," I said. "Most don't." We felt quiet again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was shared, like we'd crossed some unseen line. She shifted, pulling her sweater tighter, and I noticed her hands trembling from the cold. "You're freezing," I said, starting to shrug off my jacket. She shook her head quick. "No, I'm fine," she protested, but her teeth chattered. I ignored her, draping it over her shoulders. "Take it," I said. "I've got layers." She hesitated, then pulled it close, her fingers brushing mine for a beat. "Thanks," she murmured, soft as breath. We started talking again. Nothing big, just safe, real things. She told me about a project from years back, a community center with a rooftop garden. Her favorite because it was for people, not profit. I shared a short story I'd written in college. Nothing special, but the first time I'd felt like I was telling a truth. "I still have it somewhere," I admitted. "Probably in a box under my bed." She laughed, a warm, soft sound that cut the night's chill. "You should dig it out," she said. "Might be better than you think." The talk flowed easy, natural, like we'd known each other longer. She mentioned the jazz she played while sketching, old Ella Fitzgerald tracks that made her feel alive. I described my runs along the Charles, how the rhythm of my feet sometimes anchored me when nothing else did. We skipped Derek, the firm, the roles we played for others. It was just us two people trading pieces of ourselves under a starless sky. The cold turned biting, and cabin lights began winking out as folks headed to bed. Nora stood, my jacket still on, gazing at the lake one last time. "I have to go," she said, voice steady but reluctant. "Derek's probably wondering where I am." I nodded, rising too, legs stiff from sitting so long. "You good to get back?" I asked, scanning her face. She held my eyes, and for a flash, I saw it. Gratitude. Maybe deeper. "Better than before," she said. "Because of you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, throat tight. She handed back my jacket, fingers grazing mine again, and headed for the cabins. I watched her fade into the dark, her steps soft on gravel. The lake spread before me, dark and calm, and I stayed a while, feeling something shift inside like I'd seen what I couldn't unsee. The morning after our lakeside talk felt like waking from a dream that wouldn't quite fade. The resort hummed with energy, co-workers chuckling over coffee, HR herding us to the day's exercises. I sat at a long wooden table in the dining hall, nursing black coffee, eyes drifting aimlessly. Then I spotted her. Nora was across the room, next to Derek, who scrolled his phone, face lit by the screen. She was put together now, hair pulled back smooth, sweater swapped for a crisp blouse. She looked like the company event version. Polite, distant Derek's wife. But when our eyes met through the crowd, for a split second, there was a spark recognition, a shared secret. Then she looked away, nodding at something Derek said, and the moment vanished. I stirred my coffee, spoon clinking against the mug, trying to tune into the chatter. But my mind wandered back to the dock, to how Nora's voice had cracked, talking about losing herself, to that laugh like a quiet win. I replayed her words, "I'm 45, and I've spent years being invisible." It wasn't just her hurt haunting me. It mirrored mine, the burial of my own dreams under safe choices and screens. I wanted to check on her, see if last night lingered, but she was with Derek, and the gap between us felt wider than the lake. The rest of the seminar blurred by. I went through the motions. Kayaking, some blindfold trust exercise, a campfire where everyone faked bonding. Nora stayed by Derek's side, offering that practiced smile. We didn't speak again. Once, during a break, I caught her alone by a window, staring at the lake, arms crossed like holding herself in. I started toward her, but Derek appeared, hand on her shoulder, drawing her back to the group. I stopped, chest tight, and turned away. Whatever happened that night, it was done. She'd returned to her world. I'd go back to mine. The drive home to Boston was quiet, just me and my thoughts. Highway unspooling under a gray sky. I waited to feel normal, like the lake was a fleeting blip. But it wasn't. It was like glimpsing a crack in the universe, a peek at something raw beneath our polished, predictable lives. I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't corner Nora at the next company event and ask, "Hey, still feeling invisible?" She was Derek's wife, my boss's wife, and that line felt sharper than ever. Back in the city, days slipped into old rhythms. Work, home, runs along the Charles. Nose in a book when not glued to a screen. But nothing felt the same. I'd catch myself thinking of her at odd moments, passing a sleek, modern building she might have designed, or hearing jazz that echoed her sketching days. I didn't reach out. It wouldn't be right. Not after how she'd closed off at breakfast, like drawing a curtain on what we'd shared. I told myself it was for the best that she needed space, that I was just the guy who happened to be there when she needed to talk. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something in me had shifted. I started pulling out old college notebooks, pages of half-finished stories abandoned years ago. I didn't write anything new, not yet. But holding them, rereading those scribbled words for my younger self, felt like reclaiming a piece of me. Like Nora's honesty had unlocked something like her, truth gave me permission to eye my own life and spot what I'd ignored. I didn't know if she felt the same, if that night mattered beyond a weak moment. But I hoped so. Hoped she was finding the woman who built worlds, who burned with ideas too big to hold. I saw Derek at the office the next week, same as ever. Crisp suit, sharp smile, rattling off market forecasts like nothing else existed. I scanned his face for a sign, a hint he knew his wife was fraying, but nothing. Just that same confidence, that grip on control. I wondered what he'd say if he knew I'd sat with Nora by the lake, seen her in a way he hadn't in years. But I stayed quiet. That night wasn't mine. It was hers. Boston settled into its autumn pulse. Crisp air, leaves crunching underfoot, the city humming with early holiday lights. I'd fallen back into routine long office days, Charles River runs, evenings with a book or screen. But the lake night clung like a stubborn melody. Nora's raw voice echoed in the quiet gaps. Her confession about losing her architect self, trading it for a role she no longer knew. I didn't try contacting her. She was Derek's wife, and that wall felt unbreakable. Yet I couldn't stop wondering if she was okay, if she'd picked up that pencil she'd mentioned to sketch herself back into being. Work chugged on as usual. I'd pass Derek in the halls, his booming voice full of easy command as he closed deals or wooed clients. He never brought up the seminar, gave no sign he'd heard his wife break down that night. I'd watch him sometimes, hunting for a crack in his polished armor, but nada. Just the tailored suit, the effortless grin. I wondered if he'd ever noticed Nora's smile didn't light her eyes, or if he'd stopped looking long ago. I kept my distance, nodding politely when paths crossed, but my thoughts drifted to her. That laugh through tears, the weight of her words on that dock. I toyed with reaching out a text, an email, just to check in. But every time I pulled out my phone, I backed off. What would I say? Hey, still invisible? It felt like barging in uninvited. She'd shared something true that night. But it wasn't a promise or an open door. It was a moment, and maybe it needed to stay that way. So I dove into work, into runs, into flipping through those old notebooks, chasing the me who wrote stories instead of financial reports. Then, on a rainy Friday, buried in a spreadsheet at my desk, an email popped up. No subject, no sender name, just a throwaway temp address. I nearly trashed it as spam, but something made me click. One line, plain and bare. Thanks for seeing me. For not looking away. My breath hitched. No signature needed. It was Nora's words, echoing that lake night, carrying the same quiet weight. I read it again, then a third time, heart pounding. It wasn't an invite, not really, but proof the night hadn't been a dream, that it had mattered to her too. I leaned back in my chair, office noise fading to a hum. Part of me wanted to reply, say anything to keep the thread alive. But I didn't. The email felt like a boundary, a way for her to acknowledge it without stepping further. I honored that. I closed it, neither saving nor deleting. It sat in my inbox, a subtle marker of a moment that had changed us both. I told no one, not friends, not coworkers. It wasn't their story. The days after that email tasted different. I started noticing things I'd overlooked. How light skimmed buildings on my runs, their clean lines and thoughtful angles, like Nora had dreamed them up. I pulled out my old stories more often, reading late into the night, even jotting a few new lines. They weren't great, not yet, but they were mine, and that was enough. I wondered if Nora was doing the same, if she'd grabbed a pencil or cracked open a sketch pad, rebuilding bit by bit. I hope so. Not just for her, but for me. Seeing her that night had sparked a want in me to find my own way back. I caught Derek in a meeting the following week, owning the room as always, tossing ideas like gold. I watched him, wondering if he ever sensed the gulf with his wife, if he'd caught her tears like I had. But his face gave nothing away, and I asked no questions. Whatever bound them wasn't mine to fix or probe. All I knew was Nora had trusted me with a piece of her, and that trust, fleeting as it was, left a mark. It pushed me to be better, not at work or life, but at seeing people really seeing them, like I'd seen her. The weeks after the email blurred in Boston's gray fall, rain, slick streets, office buzz, the steady beat of my Charles runs. That single line from Nora, "Thanks for seeing me," for not looking away, stayed with me. Tucked like a note in a pocket, I kept checking. I didn't reply. I didn't seek her out. That would have crossed a line, invaded space she hadn't offered. But those words stirred something, made me see the world sharper, the sharp edges of skyscrapers against the sky, the hidden stories in strangers' faces I'd never bothered to notice. I started writing again, in fits. Story scraps scratched into a notebook late at night. It wasn't much, but a start, a way to reclaim what I'd buried under spreadsheets and smart bets. Work stayed the same. Derek stayed Derek, striding halls, voice-slicing meetings, aura pulling every eye. I'd watch him at times, wondering if he felt the echo of what Nora had spilled to me by the lake. But he showed nothing, flashing his usual polished smile before the next deal. I kept space, nodding in passing, but my mind winged to her. That moonlit face, that honest voice. I wondered if she was holding up, if she'd pieced back the parts of herself she'd lost. One Friday, I left the office early. Weeks' weight heavy on my shoulders. I wandered into a cozy Cambridge bookstore I'd hit 100 times. Shelves crammed with used paperbacks, faint scent of aged pages. I browsed fiction, mind elsewhere, when voices pulled me, murmured chat, chair scrapes from the back. A sign by the door caught me. Architecture basics. Evening classes for adults. Curiosity tugged me closer. I peeked through the doorway to the back room, and there she was. Nora, standing at a whiteboard, marker in hand, explaining structural design to a small group of older students. She looked alive, transformed, vibrant in a way I'd never seen. Blonde hair loosely tied, sleeves rolled up, voice warm and sure as she pointed to a sketch. Students leaned in, nodding, jotting notes, and she moved with fresh ease, like she belonged right there. I froze in the frame, heart thumping, torn between staying and bolting. Then her eyes lifted, brown gaze locking on mine. Her face stilled, surprise, then knowing, then something softer. She didn't break stride, just a small nod of welcome before continuing. I waited for the break, lingering by an art book aisle. As students filed out chatting, notebooks clutched, Nora approached, marker still in grip. "Miles," she said, voice calm but warm, like picking up a thread from minutes ago. "Didn't expect you here." I smiled, a bit sheepish. "Me neither, just browsing." She tilted her head, eyes searching mine, and I saw that dock spark again, but steadier, less breakable. "I started teaching," she explained, gesturing to the board. "Part-time for now. A friend runs the program and I thought, why not? I loved this once, designing, creating, showing people how to see spaces differently. I'm trying to get it back." Her tone was low, resolved like a choice, with no turning back. I nodded, throat tight. "It suits you," I said. "You look like you again." She smiled, a full one, lighting her eyes. "Because of you," she murmured, voice softening. "That night by the lake, you didn't try to fix me or make it more than it was. You just listened, and it was enough to make me want to try again." I didn't know what to say, so I stood there, hands pocketed, feeling her words pull. "I didn't do anything special," I managed. "I just saw you." She shook her head, smile, tinged, sad. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." Students trickled back, and she glanced over her shoulder, then at me. "Gotta get back," she said. "No rush, no brush off." "Good seeing you, Miles." I nodded, chest warm with unnamed feeling. "You too," I said. "Keep sketching." She laughed soft, a sound that followed me out the bookstore door, evening air cool against my skin. On the sidewalk, city humming around me, I felt lighter, like I'd found what I hadn't known I was hunting. Nora wasn't just Derek's wife anymore, in my eyes. She was the woman who'd bared her ache, who'd reminded me that seeing someone truly seeing could shift more than a moment. And in quiet ways, she'd shifted me too. The bookstore's bell jingled soft behind me as I hit Cambridge's sidewalk. Late autumn bite in the air. Nora's voice lingered in my head, her steady confidence teaching, the glow in her eyes talking architecture. It was like seeing her fresh, not as Derek's shadow, not as the crying woman by the lake, but as Nora whole, alive, claiming back what she'd lost. I walked home through city lights, hands in pockets, that lake night's weight turning to something new. Not ache, but clarity. Before I left, she'd called after me, voice gentle but clear. "Miles." I'd turned, meeting her gaze across the room, students milling. "No more emails," she'd said, small smile playing. "But if you ever want to sit in the back of class on a Friday, I won't kick you out." I'd smiled back. No promises, just a nod. "I'll keep that in mind," I'd said. And I meant it. No need for more words. No need to swell it bigger. We'd shared something true. That was enough. Back in my apartment, slumped on the couch, city purring outside my window, I dug out an old notebook, those college pages of unfinished tales, and flipped through. The words jumped alive, no longer relics of a younger me, but sparks of what I could still chase. I grabbed a pen and started writing. Not a full story, not yet, but lines about the lake. The moon, Nora's voice cracking, then steadying. It wasn't much, but a beginning. A way to hold what I'd learned. That seeing someone really seeing could change everything. I didn't go back to the bookstore the next Friday, or the one after. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. Nora had given me something by that lake, and again in that classroom. A nudge that life wasn't just safety, hiding behind spreadsheets or routines. She'd shared her hurt, and in doing so, showed me how to face mine. I wrote more, not scraps, but real stories, rough and raw, but mine. I even submitted one to a small literary mag, no expectations, just to dare. It felt like a step, tiny, toward the me I'd nearly forgotten. At the office, Derek was still Derek, storming meetings with conqueror's stride, voice carrying his unbroken world. I saw him different now, not judging, but with quiet understanding. He didn't see Nora like I had. Maybe he never would, but that wasn't mine to mend. It was her story, and she was rewriting it one sketch, one class at a time. I didn't see her again, not in person, but I didn't need to. That lake night, the email, the bookstore glimpse, it was plenty. Proof that the thinnest threads, the quietest moments, could etch the deepest marks. I thought back to what she'd said about the mirror not recognizing herself, and I realized I'd done the same, living a life not fully mine, dodging the risks of wanting. Nora changed that, not through forbidden romance or crossed lines, but because we'd seen each other, truly, in a way that nudged us to want more. She'd returned to architecture, to her fire, to living, and I was starting to reclaim mine. Some late nights, I'd recall that dock the chill air, her sobs easing to shared quiet. It wasn't love, not the storybook kind. It was subtler, truer, a flash of understanding needing no name or claim. It was enough that it happened that we were both there, that we left a little less adrift. And if one day I showed at her Friday class, I'd just slip to the back, listen, watch her shape the world she'd always meant to build. Not expecting anything from her, but because some bonds don't need endings. They just need to be. In the soft shadows of an autumn lakeside night, where still waters hold secrets, a single talk can weave back the frayed threads of a wandering life. Picture it. A young man, trapped in the chill grip of office numbers, meets the shattered gaze of a woman faded into her own marriage's shade. She, once a builder of dreams, whispers raw, "I've spent years being invisible." And he, listening without judgment, without fixes, just seeing reignites her spark. The creator who crafts spaces for the soul to breathe. It's no forbidden tale, but a deeper lesson, etched in the dark water's hush. To truly see another, past the masks we all wear, is to hand yourself a mirror. It's a reminder that our buried dreams under routines, under trades, don't die. They wait for one kind glance to rise again. This story tugs at us because it echoes our hidden fights. How many of us have felt lost in the daily spin, invisible to those around us, or worse, to ourselves? We chase steady ground, trading our core the writer inside, the artist sketching, the dreamer pulsing for survival. But one shared crack in the armor can shift it all. It urges us to grab the pencil, dust off the notebook, dare voice the truths we've hushed. Life isn't a straight shot of winds. It's a lake of shifting gleams, where human ties fragile, real make us stronger. It teaches empathy isn't weight, but a bridge to our own revival. So tonight, what if you faced the mirror with grace? What if you listened to that inner whisper? You're still here? Share in the comments. What vulnerable moment helped you find your way back? Your story could light paths for thousands searching. And if these tales that stir and shift resonate, subscribe to the channel now. Don't miss these inner journeys reminding us that in the world's whirl, light often blooms from one true look. Together, let's build spaces where no one fades unseen. Thanks for being here. See you soon for more Real Heart.